On Christmas morning, my mother smiled and handed a key to my sister, remarking, "We bought a property for her. You'll understand someday." I remained silent until my father gave me my gift, a simple piece of paper. When he read what was written, his face froze instantly. That Christmas morning, the Normandy stone house seemed suspended in time. The frosted windows filtered a soft light, and the aroma of buttered bread mingled with the scent of fresh coffee lingering in the air. The Christmas tree, adorned with ornaments inherited from my grandmother, sparkled faintly in the living room. Everything was familiar, almost comforting, yet an unseen tension hung in the room like a fog we dared not name. Seated on the worn sofa, I twisted a paper napkin, awaiting the inevitable. My mother entered, her red shawl over her shoulders and a radiant smile on her lips. She carried a small box tied with a golden ribbon, which she handed to Sophie with a pride that highlighted her wrinkles. "Open it, dear," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. Sophie, with her flawless curls and princess-like air, unwrapped the gift with dramatic exclamations. "A key!" she exclaimed, the object gleaming. "A whole house!" she cried, as my mother nodded, tears in her eyes. My father, near the fireplace, approved with a solemn grunt, as if blessing a queen. Then it was my turn. My father handed me a thin envelope without a word, without looking at me. I opened it silently, my fingers clenching the paper. A check, for €100, hastily folded. Not a smile, not a word. The contrast struck me like a slap. Sophie smiled, already lost in dreams of decoration, while I stood there, a ghost in my own home. It wasn't just a gift. It was a reminder, etched in the cold of that Christmas, of my perpetual place, that of the forgotten one. The living room filled with Sophie's vibrant laughter as she twirled the key under the tree's light, her brown curls fluttering. My mother stroked her shoulder, whispering plans for the house in Honfleur, a terrace facing the sea, blue shutters. My father, pipe in hand, nodded, already prepared to boast about this gift at the next village dinner. I stared at the crumpled check in my hand, €100, which felt like a ton. It wasn't the amount that hurt me, but the silence that accompanied it. And as their voices blended into a symphony of joy, my mind drifted from that Christmas and back, to memories I had tried to suppress. I was 10, on a rainy autumn night in 1975. The kitchen smelled of hot chocolate and vanilla. With my grandmother, I had spent the afternoon baking a cake for my birthday. My little hands were sticky with batter. I imagined a party, laughter, perhaps even a Claude François record on the old turntable. But my mother arrived and, with a reluctant air, announced we had to leave early the next day for Sophie's dance competition in Caen. "We don't have time, of course," she sighed, turning off the oven. The next day, I woke to an empty house, the untouched cake on the table, and a candle lit out of pity. Sophie returned with a silver ribbon, and my mother hung her certificate on the wall, forgetting it was my day. Years later, at 18, I reached another milestone. My physics teacher congratulated me on my solar energy project, brilliant enough to earn me a scholarship to the Sorbonne. I had worked nights on end in our barn, surrounded by cables and old manuals. The school ceremony was packed, chairs creaking, under the weight of proud families. My name was called, followed by warm applause. But as I stepped down from the stage, diploma in hand, I scanned the crowd. No familiar faces. My father sent me a telegram. "Good job," while he was having a calvados at the local cafe with his friends. My mother had taken Sophie to an audition for a perfume commercial in Paris. A few weeks later, that commercial was on television. Sophie, smiling, promoting a cheap fragrance. That night, the house buzzed with shouts of joy. They pushed the table aside to dance, and my father framed a newspaper clipping with Sophie's picture and placed it over the fireplace like a relic. I returned to the present, my fingers clenched around the envelope. Sophie was still talking, her voice like a scratched record, perhaps about a conservatory. My mother nodded, her eyes gleaming. I remembered those moments when I naively believed my efforts would reach them. At 14, I saved up to give my mother a scarf for Christmas. I earned every penny helping at the market. She wore it once, then tucked it away in a drawer. Sophie received a silver watch she flaunted at every meal. At 20, I landed my first job as a proofreader at a small publishing house. I announced the news over the phone, hoping for a positive reaction. My father grumbled, "That's nice, but Sophie is negotiating a contract with a theater troupe." Always Sophie. Always more important, more brilliant, more deserving of their attention. That Christmas, sitting in the shadow of her radiance, I understood it wasn't a momentary oversight. It was a lifetime of being erased. My achievements were swallowed by their indifference. My eyes burned, but I swallowed my tears. They wouldn't see my pain. Not yet. The day after Christmas, the house was quiet, almost too quiet after the previous day's bustle. Sophie had gone to visit her new house with a friend, leaving behind a trail of sweet perfume and decoration brochures scattered on the table. My mother was tidying the kitchen, humming a Dalida song, while my father read the newspaper by the window, his face stern. I had gone up to the attic to sort through some old things, a task my mother had entrusted to me with an insistence tinged with disapproval. "It would be good if you kept yourself a bit busy." I didn't reply, preferring the refuge of the dusty shadows to the distant gazes downstairs. While moving a trunk, I came across a rusty metal box, partly hidden under moth-eaten blankets. Inside, yellowed letters, bills, and a notebook with a worn cover. Curious, I flipped through the journal's pages and held my breath. An entry dated 2010 mentioned the sale of an orchard in Isieux, a piece of land my grandmother had bequeathed to me in a whisper before she died. I had spent summers there picking apples, listening to the wind in the branches. My parents told me it had been abandoned, worthless. But there, before my eyes, a sum of 40,000 euros had been raised to finance Sophie's drama classes in Paris. They had sold my inheritance without a word to me, without consulting me. My heart tightened, a dull anger rising in my throat. It wasn't just neglect, it was theft. A few days later, another blow struck me. During a tense dinner, my father let slip a sentence that chilled me. He was talking about the work on the Deauville house, their precious summer retreat, and mentioned, "Luckily we had that loan, otherwise we wouldn't have finished the veranda." My mother shot him a piercing look, but it was too late. "What loan?" I asked, my voice trembling. He stammered, tried to change the subject, but I pressed relentlessly. Finally, he confessed, through gritted teeth. "We took out a bank loan for a few thousand euros in your name 3 years ago to cover the renovations. Without telling you, without your signature. I mean, without your presence." A wave of nausea washed over me. I pictured a bank clerk, a forged document, my identity used like a puppet for their whims. And why? So Sophie could parade on the beach with her friends in a house they called the family's, but to which I was never truly invited. I left the table without a word, their silence weighing on me like an accusation. In my childhood room, I sat on the narrow bed, the walls covered, with faded posters. These two revelations spun in my head, intensifying the pain of the past Christmas. The orchard sold to fulfill Sophie's dreams. The loan, an invisible chain tied to my name. It was no longer just indifference or favoritism. It was a calculated betrayal, a plundering of what was mine. They had built their world on my shoulders, relegating me to the role of a useful pawn, but never loved. My hands trembled, but not from fear, but from rage. I could no longer close my eyes. In the gloom of the attic, an idea sprouted, cold and clear. They had taken too much from me, and I would take back what was mine. Not for revenge, but out of necessity. For me, The days following my discovery in the attic turned into a haze of insomnia and weary thoughts. I stayed with my parents under the pretext of helping them. But every glance I exchanged with them, my mother busy knitting, my father smoking his pipe on the doorstep, felt like a charade. The metal box hidden under my bed burned in my mind, the orchard sold, the loan in my name. These truths haunted me, but an intuition urged me to dig deeper. It wasn't over. On Saturday afternoon, as rain drummed on the roof tiles, I found my chance. My mother had gone to the market, my father to the village cafe. The house was mine. I went down to my father's study, a dark room with shelves crammed with ledgers and old almanacs. It smelled of stale tobacco and musty paper. The safe, a black steel cube embedded in the wall, drew me like a magnet. He always locked it with an almost maniacal obsession, checking the handle every night before bed. But that day, by miracle or negligence, the door was ajar, the latch loose. My pulse quickened. I knew I shouldn't have looked. That crossing this line would be a point of no return. But my fingers, as if moved by their own will, pulled the door open. Inside, neatly, stacked files, tax returns, and bank contracts. Nothing unusual for a man of his generation so attached to his papers. Then, under a pile of receipts, I saw a will dated the previous year and a sealed envelope with angular handwriting, my father's. To be opened after my death, the note said. I gasped. I had no right, but anger, exhaustion, and this? Thirst for understanding drove me to break the seal. The pages crackled under my trembling fingers. It wasn't the will he had shown us years before, the one where he swore he would divide everything equally between Sophie and me. No, this was different. My name, Claire Duval, appeared first, linked to a property. A house in Bayeul, bought 5 years ago. A house I had never heard of. I turned the pages further, my heart pounding. Notarized deeds confirmed the purchase, registered in my name. But that wasn't all. Bank statements showed transfers, loans, money movements, tens of thousands of euros, all linked to my identity. A signature, mine, was stamped at the bottom of a loan authorization dated 1990, but I had never signed it. The handwriting was similar, but the curves of the C were too stiff, and the accents misplaced. A forgery. My legs grew weak. They had used my name as a front, a smokescreen for their finances, while Sophie shone in the spotlight. For how long? Why? I sank heavily into my father's chair, documents scattered before me. The rain outside seemed to amplify the chaos in my head. Bayeul, a house, a secret life built on my back, while he treated me like a shadow. Sophie had her keys, her dreams financed by my stolen land, my hidden debts. And I was left with a 100 euro check, crumbs to ease their conscience. But there, in that safe, I held a truth greater than their contempt. A truth that could change everything. My hands stopped shaking. Fear vanished, replaced by a cold clarity. He thought he had broken me. He was mistaken. I had found a weapon and I was going to use it. I left the house the next morning before the rooster crowed. My mother, still in her dressing gown, barely looked up from her coffee to murmur a safe travels. My father, already outside pruning the rose bushes, just grunted. He suspected nothing. In my suitcase, the documents from the safe, the will, the statements, proof of their duplicity, weighed like a promise. I drove towards Rouen under a gray sky, the radio off, my mind buzzing with calculations. It was no longer time to cry or scream. It was time to act, and I knew exactly where to start. In Rouen, I scheduled an appointment with Maître Lefebvre, a retired notary my uncle had recommended years ago. His office smelled of leather and polished wood, an oasis of calm in my inner storm. I laid the file on his desk, The pages crumpled in my nervous hands. "Tell me what all this is worth," I said simply. He adjusted his glasses and set to work, his gnarled fingers turning the pages with meticulous precision. For 2 hours, he dissected every line. The house in Bayeul, a small discreet pavilion bought in 2018, was indeed a well-kept secret in my name. But there were also the bank transfers and forged loans, some dating back 10 years. "This is clear fraud," he concluded, his voice dry. "With this, you could take them to court." But justice wasn't my goal. Not yet. The notary frowned when I asked him to investigate another matter. The Deauville house, the family treasure. They talked about it incessantly, the weekends at the beach, the endless renovations. He returned a week later with news that made my heart race. The house was mortgaged, a huge loan taken out in 2020 to cover a debt linked to Sophie. She had opened a fashion boutique in Paris, a fiasco that had consumed hundreds of thousands of euros. My parents had used their savings and mortgaged the Deauville house to save their star. Only they hadn't managed to keep up with the payments. The bank had lost patience. The house was about to be foreclosed. I saw my opening. "Can we buy it?" I asked. The notary looked at me, surprised, then a smile flickered across his face. "Through a third party." "Yes, discreetly." For months I prepared everything. I sold shares I had accumulated while working, saving every penny from my proofreader's salary. The notary found an intermediary, an old friend of his, to bid at the auction. That day, I stayed home, nails digging into my palms, waiting for his call. When he confirmed, "It's done. She's yours." A strangely satisfying warmth washed over me, not of triumph, but of control. The Deauville house, their sanctuary, was mine, and they knew nothing. I remained silent. When my mother called to complain about high bills, I murmured sympathetically. When my father sent a rude message, "You should find a better job," I replied politely. Sophie flooded me with voice messages about her new projects, and I listened, without truly hearing. They lived in their bubbles, believing I was still the same Claire, docile and invisible. But right under their noses, I had woven my web. I didn't want to shout my victory at them. Not yet. True strength lay in waiting. In the moment they would realize, too late, that the game had changed. Christmas was approaching. It would be the perfect setting. Christmas arrived, shrouded in a thick fog that clung to the windows of the Norman house. The smell of roasted chestnuts hung in the air, and the pine tree, more laden than ever, glittered under tired garlands. My mother brought out her porcelain service, the one reserved for special occasions, and my father sat at the head of the table, his glass of cider in hand. Sophie, who had returned from Paris for the occasion, wore a new cashmere sweater, a gift from her sponsors, she said with a bright smile. Everything was in place, like a well-rehearsed play, but this time I had rewritten the final act. The tea, gift exchange began after dessert. My mother handed Sophie an elegant package wrapped in silver paper. "For my little star," she cooed. Sophie tore open the wrapping with exaggerated exclamations, revealing a leather handbag, a luxury model she held up like a trophy. "It's magnificent!" she cried, kissing my parents one by one. My father puffed out his chest, proud as a peacock. Then it was my turn. He handed me a small, ribbonless box with a vague note. "For Claire." I opened it without a word. A hat pin, tarnished, probably found in a drawer. A strained smile crossed his face, but his eyes were already elsewhere. Then I stood up with a small white package in my hand, simple and unadorned. "For you, Dad," I said calmly, placing it before him. He chuckled, shaking the box. "Doesn't weigh much." "Socks, perhaps?" Sophie giggled, exchanging a knowing look with him. "Open it," I insisted, my voice soft but firm. He straightened his shoulders and undid the flap. Inside, a thick cream-colored envelope, sealed with a notary's stamp. His laughter died. He unfolded the pages, his eyes scanning the lines, and his face froze. Confusion, then a flicker of panic. My mother leaned forward, intrigued. "What is it?" she asked, her tone rising. I let the silence settle, heavy and sharp, then spoke calmly. "The Deauville house is mine now. Merry Christmas!" A gasp escaped my mother. My father dropped the papers, his hands trembling. Sophie, still perched on her cloud, frowned. "Wait, what? The Deauville house?" She paused, seeking an explanation in our parents' eyes. No one moved. The deed, signed and dated, lay on the table, irrefutable. My mother stammered. "You bought it?" I nodded. "Through a third party, months ago, legal and final." My father found his voice again, now furious. "The bank? It's impossible. We just needed time." I smiled faintly. "The bank doesn't wait." Sophie slammed her fist on the table, her facade cracking. "But we were supposed to go this summer. You promised." My mother tried another tactic, her voice sweet. "Claire, my dear, it was for the family. We can work this out, can't we?" "No." I faced her, unrelenting. "The family? The one that sold my orchard? That signed loans in my name?" A glacial silence fell. Their faces turned pale. They knew I knew. My father stood up, pointing a finger. "You betray us like this? After all we've done?" I leaned towards him, my voice sharp as a blade. "All you've done is use me. Now it's over." Sophie cried. My mother murmured empty apologies, but I leaned back, calm. They could try to deny, to plead. The truth was already there, on the table, and for the first time, I had the upper hand. I left the family home before the light broke through the fog of that memorable Christmas. My father, paralyzed by the table, still clutched the papers in his trembling hands. My mother tried one last time. "Claire, wait!" But her voice was lost in the slam of the door. Outside, the cold air whipped my cheeks, and I got into my old Peugeot without looking back. The drive to Deauville was silent, punctuated only by the purr of the engine and the scrape of the windshield wipers on the melting snow. In my pocket, the property deed seemed to vibrate, a reminder of my new life. Arriving at the Deauville house, I pushed open the creaking door. The interior was rustic, with peeling walls and furniture covered in sheets, but it belonged to me. It was my sanctuary. I sat by the window overlooking the sea, a blanket on my shoulders and a glass of red wine in hand. The tide was coming in, waves crashing against the frozen shore under a steel sky. The silence was profound, not oppressive like that of my childhood, but comforting like a blank page. I began to fix up the house slowly, a brushstroke here, a shelf there, erasing the traces of their ostentatious summers. Weeks passed, then months. My phone buzzed with their calls. My mother first pleaded, "Your father is very ill. Come back and talk." Then my father grumbled, "You owe us an explanation." Sophie finally sent pleading messages. "Keep the house, but don't abandon us. You'll end up alone." I didn't answer. Their words slid off me like water off stones. I learned from a cousin that they were selling furniture to pay their debts, and that Sophie was looking for a rich fiancé to help her get back on her feet. Their world was crumbling, but it was no longer mine. Sitting there that night, I watched the snow fall on the sea, the wine warming my throat. The house creaked gently, an accomplice to my chosen solitude. I didn't need their apologies, their belated love. I had taken what was owed to me, not out of hatred, but to finally breathe. Here, far from there, shadows, I was free. Not a shouted victory, but a conquered peace. And that was enough. Yes,